Well, hi everybody. Great to be here. Exciting to see a room full of such talented data professionals. I'm here with Thomas from Tasman. I'm representing On Deck, and we're doing something of a double act today for you. So we'll both be talking about a piece of consultancy that Tasman, who are a data consultancy, did for us at On Deck, and I'll be talking about the kind of business challenges, why we might need to work with someone like Tasman to help us wrangle our data. And Thomas is going to be jumping in and getting really deep into some detail about what a real production piece of work looks like with the kind of problems we're facing. So it's going to be a kind of mixture of different styles. I'll be looking at the kind of overall picture, and hopefully Thomas will be supplying you with some real takeaways you can take away from this session. And any conference I go to, if I come away with one thing that I've learned, it's a win. So that's what I'm aiming to do for you today. To get us started, On Deck. I've been working on Deck for a couple of years. I've recently moved on to my own startup, but that's a different story altogether. So this covers the last couple of years of growth on Deck. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a US startup aimed at connecting people who are looking to do their next thing. So it's founders who've got a new idea, it's people who've got ambition about moving on in their careers, and we provide a community where those people can come together, and tools and services and connections around that. So you might connect with your next investor, or you might find your co-founder as part of the community. It's quite powerful. It's been running for a couple of years, and in that time, we've supported about 2,500 folks to explore, find an area where might be an opportunity for a new business, and then get it kicked off. So we've had success over that period. And it grew from essentially a dinner series, people meeting up, sharing ideas, and then because of COVID, it exploded. We suddenly didn't have those kind of face-to-face connections that we used to rely on for those kinds of things to emerge, that serendipity to happen, and it moved online, and that's where On Deck really came into its own. We provided an online kind of experience for people to get together, and through that process, we've helped about 1,000 companies to be formed, totaling about 9 billion of value. So it's a real driver, and it's a very exciting place to be. And my role as part of this company was a leading platform. So I joined very early on as a point where we only had a handful of developers, and essentially saw it go from kind of seed stage to post-Series B within about a year. It was a kind of crazy explosion during that time of lockdown. And I think what I'd like to share here is some of our learnings of that and how we helped scale that business using data. So if you imagine you're trying to pull a community together of people, and you want to connect them with video calls, you want to arrange times when they can get together via calendar links, or you want to arrange introductions with investors. There's a lot to build. We had to really hit the ground running and try to construct all sorts of different things to provide value to the community. There's a hiring platform in there. There's a kind of directory, like a mini LinkedIn. There's all sorts of stuff going on. And when you look at that, early on it felt like we were building like 20 different startups at once. There was no way that we could do all of that from a standing start to fulfill the needs of the community. So what you might think when you're kicking off a startup is think, oh, right, well, we better get some engineers in, right? Obviously. On Deck took a very unusual path to the early stage growth of this business. We didn't hire loads of engineers. Early on, the majority of people who were in the room were non-technical. They're product people, they're community people. And so it started by putting together no-code tools. And this phrase has really resonated with me over the last few years, that no code is better than no code. I think those of us who've been kind of working in software for many years will know that after a certain point, code becomes a bit of a liability. It's an asset, sure, but after a while, you've got to kind of maintain it. It kind of slows you down. Not if you're experiencing this. Okay, good. Not just me. And so what we did at On Deck is, rather than building that entire surface area of product, we pulled together the best no-code tools to help make that happen. We stitched together things rather than building. And that meant that we ended up in a situation where we had non-technical, non-product people able to create the whole user experience for what was the product of OnDeck, and do a lot of what was you normally have in code, just using off-the-shelf kind of automation or drag-and-drop tools. So here's an example of like the onboarding flow. Someone's applied to join the community. It inserts a row into an Airtable, which is kind of scrappy off-the-shelf database, and it sends an email, someone approves it, and so on. And those kinds of things were completely built by non-technical members of the team. So the big learning for us is that if you embrace no-code and you don't build everything yourself, you plug together off-the-shelf tools, everyone in the team becomes a maker. They're building the product, which is really exciting. It meant we could go ridiculously fast. We could get features out in a couple of weeks that might have taken months. It was a very exciting environment to be in. So at Series A, we were mostly running on off-the-shelf tools. Slack was the core of it, and I'm sure many of us are familiar with the power of Slack. We're plugging in Zoom calls, plugging in like Typeform, and using automation tools like Zapier and Integromat, which is quite unusual. At Series A, often you'd want to have some technology in the room. You want to have some intellectual property, and we hadn't invested there. So there's a lot to like in no-code. There's low time to value. We got things out quickly for the community. We could respond to anything that came back. You know, people say they want something, we'd be able to build something quickly in response. So there's a kind of tight feedback loop of communities needing something, us providing something for them. And non-technical people were able to do all that work. This wasn't engineering. And furthermore, like, you're essentially building on the shoulders of giants. The other people are maintaining your code for you. There's a marketplace where you can just buy in automations or tools. And it's all pay-per-use. It's all SaaS. It sounds great, right? Big butt coming. The problem here is that as we grew and we were adding all these no-code tools together, the surface area of what we're building was becoming unmanageable. It was very hard to reason about everything that we did for all the different people in the community. We couldn't even work out what was sending an email. Like, what was the automation that sent that? It got pretty confusing. And in response to this, a lot of what was happening on the team was a kind of naive sense of data centralization in many ways. A lot of these tools we were pulling into Airtable, which is a very flexible database that lets you kind of quickly make up a schema of what you want to store about a particular part of the business, and then insert rows and understand what's going on. And we were using it for the CRM. We're using it for like every time we're asking for some feedback, or like what's your NPS rating for the most recent session you attended? And it was ballooning and ballooning and ballooning. And it's great for growth and flexibility, this kind of approach. But I came in with a kind of product mindset, and I found it pretty scary, I've got to say. Like, it felt like there wasn't a central sense of control on what was going on. So to give you some sense, we had about 350 Airtable bases, so separate databases, with about 3,500 tables. I actually employed someone to find out how many SaaS tools we were using. I had to do a mapping exercise, and we got 450 as a result. I mean, don't get me started on the kind of IT security risk on this thing. But the thing is that you didn't have any stable schemas in here. Everything was moving. It was very flexible. We were pivoting all the time. And that meant we had a kind of 0-degree view of the customer, not a 360-degree view, which is the kind of gold standard that everyone wants to get to. So some problems. How do you measure what's going on? Unless you've got a single view of all these things that are happening, you can't reason about your business. And that was quite challenging for us. It felt like we're flying blind. The data was inconsistent from place to place. You've got different ways of representing the same information in different places. We had Airtables where people were using emojis as column names. Like, good luck working with UTF-8. I won't say, but I think DBT handled that all right, but other stuff really didn't. And so many different data sets. Like, to pull it all into one place really is super challenging. This wasn't petabyte data. You know, we're not dealing with exabytes or streaming or anything like that. The problem was complexity, too much stuff, and not enough time to reason about it. We were using these ZAPs, kind of Zapier rules for automating, and they were quite hard to reason about once you've got thousands of the things happening. And no consistent schemas anywhere, except for the kind of web product that we're building, which was a Postgres database and was like a refuge of sanity. So debugging was hard. You couldn't work out where things were failing, where there were data problems. And for the developers in the room, sharp intake of breath. If you're dealing with no code, there's no test stage production. You're like in production all the time. Just terrifying. I remember I brought in my engineering manager on his first day, and I explained this to him. And I have a GIF of that moment for you. Wow. It was a bit mind-blowing. So wonderful and fascinating to be part of a growth curve that was just taking advantage of this stuff, but super hard to deal with the data problems that emerged. And that's when I gave Tasman a call, and Thomas will now come and talk solutions.
Oh, there we go. I wonder why we ever said yes, to be honest, to this project. Good morning, everybody. It's very nice to be back in front of a live audience. I missed this, and we all know that webinars, even though Coalesce online was fantastic, there's no substitute for a live audience. So good to have you all here. We'll just put a link to the Slack channel on there as well, or at least the hashtag. So if you have any questions while we are talking, please don't hesitate to go there, ask them. Either we cover them at the end of this talk or we cover them offline and asynchronously. At Tasman, I think there's about 5 people plus me here today. If you see people with a Tasman hoodie, go grab them. Any questions you have, any no-code situations you have, any emoji for column names, IDs that you have, please let them know. All right. So, how do we help Steph? How do we solve this problem for OnDeck, and how do we kind of help them make better decisions because of better insight and better data? Maybe a very quick introduction to what we do at Tasman. We are an expert-led consultancy. We are about 5 years old. In those 5 years, we've worked with about 40, 45 clients. We've grown to a team of 20 people. And our sort of main motto, or our main goal, is to help fast-growing companies, typically companies that have a product market fit already, but are now really ready to scale, really ready to build that data platform up from scratch. We come in and we do 3 things. We build infrastructure for them, so we build a stack. We help them hire a team or enable and coach the existing data team. And we deliver insights that includes a strategy about how that insight actually drives the business bottom line. It's been going pretty well over the last couple of years. And because it has gone pretty well, we're now 20 people. This is us in Rome in May of this year, in front of some crumbling ruins that reminded us of data stacks in some of the companies that we worked with. Because we've been around for a while, and because we want to make sure that you take something away with you today that is helpful, rather than take you through a very dry summary of exactly what we did for OnDeck, we're going to talk you through the mistakes that we made over the last 5 years, because I think I'm a firm believer in kind of learning from experience and learning from the mistakes that you made. So we made a lot of mistakes in the last 5 years, so you don't have to. We're going to talk you through 3 of them, and hopefully you're going to take some of those home with you to improve the way that you run your data team, or the way that you work in a data team, or the way as a business decision maker you use your data teams, right? So this talk is for everybody who is in a data team, everybody who's adjacent to a data team, everybody who is using a lot of no-code tools at the moment and is thinking about having a data team. Everything is here for you. All right, so because these lessons are important, I'm just going to come back to them a couple of times. So I'm going to spoil them here already a little bit. There's 3 takeaways for you today. So first of all, how do you build a great data stack? You will need to couple it one way or the other to the business. We call it business analysis. We'll talk about that. We'll explain what it is. We'll explain how we use it in the case of OnDeck. Second lesson is, if you build a good, sustainable, scalable data model, you need to model the business in a sustainable way. We call it domain modeling. We'll talk about it as well. And then the third component, the third sort of chapter of the talk, is about how do you keep your stakeholders happy? And that typically is by prioritizing insights that's novel, that's actionable, that drives the business bottom line properly. So the sort of problem that OnDeck had, and is actually something that a lot of companies in this space, particularly startup companies, have, is that they kind of expect it to be great at data these days. And that's everything ranging from knowing how to advertise, knowing how to attribute conversions to particular advertising channels, all the way through to recommending ads to people that already have bought the sofa, but now you're kind of still sending them kind of sofa ads every couple of days. That's all the sort of stuff that they fall short in these days. So many of those companies fall short. The sort of reasons why that happens, we think, are threefold. First of all, complexity of the landscape is actually quite high at this point. We'll talk about why that is, we'll talk about how you measure that, but also we'll talk about how you build a proper data stack then in that plethora of different tools that you can select from. The second big challenge is that if you are in a rapidly growing company, you typically have rapidly changing requirements as well. So how do you build a sort of strategy that capitalizes on those changing requirements? How do you make sure that your data model grows with those changing requirements and changing business questions? And then the third challenge is very much that, well, it's very easy to spend a lot of data. It's actually quite hard to make sure that that spend actually pays off for your business. So let's talk about it a little bit as well. What's the most efficient way to make sure that you get that insight to be actionable and working for you? Pitfall number one, reinventing the wheel. This is about data stacks. This is about how to centralize your data. This is about what tools you choose for the job. And it's sort of two thoughts that I want to start with. So first of all, as I'm sure all of you know, collection of data, transformation, modeling, storage is cheaper than ever. And partly because of that, there's now a huge amount of interesting, unbundled, high-quality, modular, open-core tools available in the market. And that does not facilitate things necessarily. It means that if you would build a map of the data ecosystem, as Andreessen Horowitz did on this slide over here, you will find yourself confused quite quickly. So this chapter is about how to find your way through there, what the sort of design principles are. It's what we did with OnDeck. It was a consultative process, of course, making sure that we could, first of all, limit this to business intelligence, still a very complex story, but most importantly, simplify the sort of decision-making to what we call a centralized data stack. And this is something that I think most of you in modern data teams will have a version of this. It's something we build for all of our clients. It's something we think works best in most of the use cases in small growing companies that we see. So we're going to talk through the different components here, but the main point is that centralizing your data starts at the data sources, of course, trying to get as much unfiltered, unaggregated, raw, event-level data, if possible, and otherwise the rawest form of aggregated data you can find, and pipe it all into one set of schemas in your data warehouse. So always retain that raw data, always make sure it's there, always make sure it's well cataloged, and so on and so on, but don't do any transformations in the pipeline. Just chuck it in your data warehouse. The storage is cheap enough these days that that's possible for almost every startup out there. It's only when you get to very big data volumes that you have to start thinking through more efficient pathways. Once it's in that source layer in data warehouse, we then run modeling. We'll talk about domain models and how all of that works. But essentially that goes through a series of phases that then ends in what we call the presentation layer, which is where the single source of truth is being kept. And that's then the sort of data layer that is consumed by all of the consuming applications, whether that is dashboards or static dashboards, whether that's dynamic dashboards, whether that's self-serve, whether that's anything else, whether that's ad hoc analysis that you're running, or even whether that's reverse ETL when you're piping all of that back into your sort of SaaS tools, all 450 of them in the case of OnDeck. What this looks like for OnDeck then is, this is a nice mirror graph that we pulled together to show this. So just simplifying this a little bit, if we chart this out on this map, the tools that we chose for OnDeck and that have been working very well, for the sort of ingestion and transportation, RudderStack for event data, 5ton and Stitch for connecting to the different SaaS tools that are data generating and that we couldn't pull RudderStack into. That worked quite well, quite easy to set up. SaaS, as in it's adding another SaaS tool to the sort of mix to solve your SaaS tool problem, but it worked in this case pretty well for us to get the data in rather effortlessly. Snowflake has the main data warehouse to bundle everything together, to store all those layers in, and then of course transformation done in dbt at every stage along the way. Everything from the sort of cleaning and filtering of the data all the way through to modeling it into the main layer, all the way through to modeling it into the presentation layer of your systems. And the output in this case was then quite straightforward as well. We used a combination of Metabase and Looker for the reporting. Metabase for some of the more static and designed dashboards, Looker for some of the more self-service pieces. We had Hex as the sort of main SQL explorative notebook environment, which worked very well. And then, of course, there were a bundle of R and Python notebooks as well, essentially because we surfaced this presentation layer, the data model, to the entire business. Everybody who wanted to write SQL could access it one way or the other. Then talking about the sort of more overarching tools choices here, we were considering Elementary for data observability, so that's sort of auditing of the stack, making sure that everything happens properly and is QA'd properly and is tested properly, and High Touch to kind of link the data generated in the presentation layer back into some of the CRM tools and SaaS tools that we were using. Everything scheduled, by the way, with Prefect in a very nice and stable manner. And this, I think, is what we consider at this point a very good stack for starting and growing companies. So if you're still considering what tools to use, you could do worse than this set of tools over here. So that's the centralization question, just a sort of theoretical outlay of what are the choices that we make, what the technology is behind all of this, and so on and so on. The question then becomes, you got to start somewhere. We run in sprints, so we had quite a high pressure to make sure we got value quite quickly. And the question then became, what's the sort of first source that you start to pull into Snowflake, and how bad is it actually going to be? So the process that we use to do that with is called business analysis. It's essentially a way to quantify and process the different requirements you get. In a growing company, you're going to get a huge amount of different stakeholder requirements. You're going to get 5 or 6 different versions of different priorities. You need a way to sort of process through those, and we call it business analysis. We start with a high-level roadmap, which we show later a little bit what that looks like. We translate those sort of epics into much more technical stories that realize very concrete, tangible value, and then we scope them out in something that's called technical analysis and go from there. Following this process, well, it was actually pretty straightforward. Airtable was the main sort of data source that we had to start centralizing first. But you remember from Steph's comments that Airtable was a particularly, can I say, nasty sort of data source for us. So how do we deal with the columns in Airtable? How do we deal not just with emoji in column names, but also with column names that users could edit? Because remember, everybody at OnDeck could be kind of building the product or building the pipeline flows or building anything else. So that meant that Airtable was not really a static source. It was dynamic. It moved. It was it was hard to kind of have a proper schema of Airtable that didn't change day in, day out. So rather than, because the obvious option then would be to sort of structure this a bit more, and we did that later in the project. We kind of made sure that Airtable was a lot more structured, that the data entry was governed well, and so on and so on. But that was not really an option at the start of the project, because Airtable, remember, was also the place where all of the automation took place and where all of the funnel steps took place as well. So what we did was we were heavy users of Jinja, and we wrote, I think, 270 lines of Jinja that dealt with these dynamic column names, and I think it spat out 150,000 lines of SQL that then was able to deal with all of these column names. It was not a preferred pathway in any way whatsoever, but it was necessary, and that's, I guess, the sort of point here, that the impetus for us was very much to create value quickly. Going back to the business and saying, yeah, sorry, you got to change the way your entire product works is not an option at that point. You got to kind of work with the tools that you have. If that means 270 lines of Jinja, well, it means that. Later then we cleaned it up, luckily, and now I think it looks a lot better than this, but this was a fun exercise. All right, so that's actually tip 1. Great business analysis leads to a great data stack, and great data stack there is not just technologically sound, but also a data stack that is optimized for creating that value for the business very quickly and very early on in the process. That's tip number 1. Pitfall number 2, mistake number 2, made that plenty of times before, and I'm sure we're not the only ones. That's around building data models. It's around, if you run a business, if you've been around for a long time, it's very easy to enter in a situation where your data model has grown organically to be almost unmaintainable and ununderstandable. If you have not really encountered that as a data practitioner, you are a very lucky person, and I'm very jealous of you. So the question is, how do you, with our experience, how do we build data models that are scalable in a changing business? The first sort of port of call there is to have a look at what the problem actually is. So this is an example of just a representation of a data model. Realize that all of our clients are fast-growing businesses, which means that tactical assumptions and the questions that those businesses might ask change. Every week, every month, whatever it is, the questions that your stakeholders ask today will be different from the ones that they ask tomorrow. Which means that your data models get written on top of a certain set of data sources, but also a certain set of business questions that are dynamic in nature. And if a new stakeholder comes along, typically a new business question gets asked, right? Because they have a different sort of purview, they have different interests. In the case of OnDeck, they might have a whole different new product line that was launched and so on and so on. They might even need new data sources because there's more SaaS tools added to the mix, or there's revenue data that you now need access to, and so on and so on. And so, as a data team, you need to expand your data model. Every time new questions get thrown into the mix, you expand the data model, you expand the data model, you expand the data model, and what you end up with is a relatively chaotic, organically grown set of loose DBT scripts that are running every day and answering, of course, that set of business questions, but don't really do more than that. And that's where you get to the trouble when it comes to maintainability, when it comes to testing, when it comes to guaranteeing the accuracy of the data that you have, and when it comes to actually quickly answering other business questions that might not be asked in the first place. So it doesn't have to be like this. And this is the sort of philosophy that we follow at Tasman, which we call domain modeling. If you look at this problem again, those business questions might be dynamic, but they are all about something that's pretty static in nature, and that's the business. Even if your business is fast growing and is adding new geographies or new products or new customers or new acquisition channels on a sort of weekly or monthly basis, chances are that the business model itself is pretty well defined and pretty well abstracted, is abstractable, as we say. So if you think about a situation where the business has achieved some kind of product market fit, so the business model is relatively static, then we find that the business and the sort of topology of the business is relatively static. So rather than build your data model, and this is the key, rather than build your data model focused on the business questions that you might need answers to on a day-to-day basis, we built it based on the static target of the business that we try to model over here. And that's called the domain model. It sits between the sort of presentational model where you build your visualization tables and so on, and the business at the very top. So as most of the sort of modern data stack technologies, domain modeling is not new. It has been around for 30 or 40 years. I think most of you will have learned, if you've learned programming in any sort of formalized way, chances are you've done it in an object-oriented manner. Object definitions, entities, nothing new under the sun, but bringing them into the sort of data modeling techniques, that's something that we're quite happy about, because for us it has taken the place of the more classic Kimball, star schema, dimension fact table type of philosophy. We still use them sometimes where they overlap, but the sort of doing it in a domain model based way very much adds a huge amount of value there that we wouldn't have before. So how does it work? And now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty here a little bit, hopefully with some nice tips and tricks for you to take home. So it's very important to realize that this is a paper exercise at first, a domain-aligned data model. What you do is you draw out the components of a business. We call those entities, and then you try and understand the relationship between those entities. So for instance, could have a company, that's an entity, right? Company can have employees. It's another entity. There's a relationship between companies and employees, which you might, well, a company needs to have at least one employee, and then the sort of relationship becomes, it's a one-to-many sort of relationship that we want to draw out here. At that point, we would use Krauss-Foot notation or anything like that to kind of make sure that that was very clear in the diagrams that we built over here. So if you talk to the engineers in the company you work with, or you talk even to the product managers, it's very easy to just get a relatively small list of all the different objects and entities that your business works with. So in this case, company, employee, simple relationship between them. No data involved. This is purely a Miro or Lucid chart, so to speak, to kind of draw out relationships between the business. Very, very much toy model this just to show you what the sort of diagram looks like. If you then look at a sort of slightly more complex example over here, this is where it gets interesting, because this is based on a real client. It's a very typical flow. So imagine a website that acquires users via marketing campaigns. And those users, once they have signed up to have a proper account, they can then interact with a customer support team. That's essentially what's being described over here. I realize that the font size might be a bit slow, might be a bit small, but I'll talk you through this. So first thing to notice is that an account user, so that's the thing there at the very top, an account user is fundamentally different from a web user. Account user could be the thing that's written in your backend, in your data tables, but it's very different, very important to have that out there from the start from the users that are just browsing your website. And that's important because we need to be very careful in any reporting downstream to distinguish between web users and account users here. Then, the flow that we have over here is actually very simple. The company runs a marketing channel, say Facebook. It runs ads or creatives on Facebook. Those ads have placements. Those placements can then generate engagement events. Those engagement events, those marketing engagement events generate visits to the website that we call web engagement events. Those visits to the websites are linked to a particular user. That user is then linked to a particular account. I realize I'm talking in circles here a little bit, but this is important to notice because this is a representation of the business that's built up without any visibility on what data is actually available whatsoever. So the account object in this case could easily be, if you want to populate this with data and want to describe this account user, it could easily need data from HubSpot, from RudderStack, from your backend database, and so on and so on. And that's kind of the point. You carefully define the rules that not just join these different data sets together, right? But you also define exactly what these objects look like and how you work with them later down the line. So any question about the business that is about the acquisition funnel, about the website behavior, or about how a user engages with the customer support team can be answered with this diagram. If it can't be answered with this diagram, we need to add another entity here. So where does this live in the stack? We built this between the presentation layer and the source and staging layer. We built this for the entire business. This is actually not even that complex of an exercise. It typically takes us a couple of days of interviews typically to try and understand all the different entities, objects, and the relationships, whether it's users or transactions or conversions or customer support tickets and so on and so on. And this is, for example, a small part of the on-deck data, of the on-deck domain model. It creates a sort of well-structured graph that might be a bit difficult to read at first, but that contains all of the information about the business that you ever want to know in terms of how different entities relate and react to each other. That then gets translated into your logical data models in the presentational layer, that then gets surfaced into your BI tools or into your ad hoc analysis pieces or even in your reverse ETL. But, and here is another key bit, the beautiful thing about these domain models is that because they sit in the middle of your data model, they are a static target. They do not change as long as the business does not change. What that means concretely is that if you are running HubSpot for CRM or you're running Airtable for CRM and you change that part of the stack, you swap out Airtable for HubSpot or you swap out HubSpot for Salesforce, all you need to do is you need to update the domain model to reflect that new data source and make sure that it gets loaded into that domain model, a part of the data model. But you should not have to edit the presentational layer, and you should not have to edit the BI tools, the dashboards, the reverse ETL, any kind of downstream consumptions. So the goal here is to create a static target in the middle of your data warehouse, in the middle of your data model, that allows you to build your entire downstream architecture on top of that static target, so that even if you swap out big SaaS tools at the top or change your column names in Airtable, that your presentational model and your output does not change. That's quite powerful because I'm sure that a lot of you working in startups spend a lot of time maintaining dashboards, making sure that they reflect changes that you made to the downstream data models, to the upstream data models, and so on and so on and so on. So it also creates a single source of truth that we talked about already. It makes sure that you can always rely on the presentational layer to be business relevant rather than be hindered or hampered by any of the data assumptions that you've made in the past. So that's tip number 2. Model the business in the domain model. Relevant for on-deck because we had such a large constellation of SaaS tools all generating data in a very dynamic way. We had to build a static layer somewhere in that data model to make sure that we didn't have to change the dashboards every single day or every single week. Pitfall number 3, last pitfall, sad stakeholders. Why is that important? At the end of the day, whether you're working as a consultant or an agency like we are, or whether you're working as a data analyst or a data engineer or an analytics engineer in a data team, you work by the grace of the business users that consume what you produce. And keeping them happy is maybe not an hour-to-hour priority, but it is very much important to kind of make sure that you do that right. So talk through a few examples of what we do to kind of make that happen, how we prioritize requests, how we make sure that everybody gets their sort of fair share of the insights that are relevant, but also how we collaborate with internal teams and how we make sure that everything is well coordinated in that growing data team that we help build it on deck, scaling from just Steph maintaining a bunch of no-code tools to about 10 people. So how do we make self-service successful? That's probably question number one. Self-service has become a bit of a buzzword. It is something that most companies would ask for or want at some point. It's very tough to get right. I think there's very much a pipe dream about what self-service could look like and a reality of what it looks like on a day-to-day basis, where as a data team, you're still building most of the reporting and dashboards. And a very big realization there is illustrated by this. So this is just a standard Looker Explore environment that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. It's something in our own sort of Looker instance that we mocked up for precisely this reason, so I'm not throwing anybody under the bus. One realization already is that this Explorer contains 153 fields. That's a lot of fields. That's a lot of explaining you have to do to any sort of business stakeholder that does not know the underlying data model to kind of help them build their own graphs and report. And not just that, it doesn't just contain 153 fields, it contains about 15 different date fields. So how is your stakeholder going to know that they need to use a particular date field in a delivered query versus the order date field in a different query, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens here typically is this, right? Is your stakeholders pulling some fields into your Looker Explorer, hitting run, and then getting a filled-in error because the date field might not, the join structure might not be set up perfectly well, or you might run a few outer joins in there just to kind of get the data all into one Explorer. And the reaction invariably is unhappy stakeholders that wonder why they ever engage you in the first place. So we try not to do that. What we do instead is much more curated explorers, making sure that we design explorers based on particular stakeholder use cases. Typically, there is a representation there of the domain model, but sometimes we just build an Explorer or a Look or the metabase and mode equivalents that allow us to just have a very simple set of dimensions and measures and taking it from there. So you see, it's much nicer to go through. In this particular example, we haven't even properly finished this because we typically add a lot of the scripting fields as well to the dimensions and measures that we work with. And the result is calm stakeholders, happy, they have their little sort of guardrails around them in the Explorers, they can build their own graphs, they can pivot the data, and they're confident that there's actually not that much that they can do wrong in these Explorers. So that's how you make self-service work. Make sure that there's a curated environment available. Don't just expose the data model in your BI tools. How do we collaborate with Steph and team? How do we make sure that everybody in the data team was happy as well? And this is where a little bit of the business analysis comes back. So we would typically, big part was that the internal data team at OnDeck was actually able to take part in talking to internal OnDeck stakeholders as well. So we have a few different types of clients we work with. Sometimes we work with clients that don't have any data team whatsoever, in which case we need to do a lot of the stakeholder feedback iterations on dashboards that we build ourselves. Sometimes we have data teams that are very much bottlenecked or very technical, that don't really talk to internal client stakeholders, and then we still need to do that sort of build report, bring it to the client, explain what it is, get feedback notes, build in iteration, and so on and so on. At OnDeck it worked really well because the internal team was able to kind of do most of that work. And that allowed us to kind of iterate very quickly, get feedback quickly, and so on and so on. What also worked well, and still is working well, is that there's a very clear sense of priority. So you need to realize that as an effective data team, you need to take charge as well in how you're going to execute a particular data strategy. And if there's no data strategy, you probably need to build one. Because a data strategy gives you the prioritization framework to understand which tangible stories, which epics, which sort of pieces of work have the highest impact to the business and are of the highest urgency. And that sort of impact versus urgency matrix is something that I very much recommend all of you to draw out if you haven't done that already. So we do that, we call it the master plan, because for some reason we like all terms nautical at Tasman and at OnDeck. And it just creates a sort of prioritization queue of what are the most important stories and entities that we work with on any given day. That gets then translated into a rather well-configured set of Monday boards where we then take the sort of high-level stories and split them into subtasks that we then divide across our teams and the on-deck teams, and that we actually also hand over to the internal teams that we work with so they can keep using these structures long after we're gone, because we typically hand over after, in a typical project, 5 or 6 months of working together. That's important because it gives you a very technical outlay. Remember when I spoke about business analysis, you start from the high-level epics, then you have the stories that contain tangible user value, and then you have the sort of subtasks. These are the subtasks that they translate into. And then those translate into a pull request, because every unit of work that we do is centralized in a pull request in a Git repository where we centralize most of the handover documentation. Not just that, we also make sure that we test it properly. There's a whole bunch of CI/CD we run on top of that, using all the dbt functionality we have there, making sure that everything that we deploy is scalable, tested, built to a particular set of specs that are agreed, and so on and so on. And again, because this is part of the handover product, the data team at OnDeck is using this internally to make sure that they collaborate pretty well as well. What's also important is that when you have built your model, to make sure that there are very clear ways of communicating the outputs and the topology and the table definitions in those models. So we use a combination at OnDeck of the dbt docs that we run on the server that are generated from the presentational layer, and Looker data dictionaries there. Depends a little bit what you want to use. I don't love the fact that it's split between Looker and dbt. I think we probably want to centralize most things in dbt, and the new metrics layer will hopefully facilitate that in the future as well. But having clear data dictionaries is really important. Spend the time to document what it is that you've built. The best documentation is code, right? But at the same time, it's also worth kind of making sure you list up all the different measures and dimensions in a proper way. So that's tip number 3, is prioritize the insight that's novel and actionable. Work together with your data teams to make sure that that prioritization framework is very clear. And the result, I guarantee you, will be happier stakeholders. Summarizing the 3 points that I wanted to convey today. Your great business analysis is important because it's the necessary criterion for building great data stacks. If you want to build a scalable and sustainable data model, you need to build a domain model first to make sure that you have a static target, so that when your business grows and scales and the requirements change, as they invariably will, that you are able to still use the same dashboards that you've built 2 years ago. 3, prioritize the insight that's novel and actionable. That's the best way to keep your business stakeholders very happy. So, Steph, what was the result? There we go. I think we need to test mic back on.
Thank you. Well, it didn't really work, that's the problem. No, I'm joking. It went down really well. So I've got to say thank you to Thomas, talking through all that detail. You can see what goes into solving some of those big problems. The complexity we're dealing with was overwhelming, and actually coming through with a very clear process of how you reduce that complexity down, break it down into small components, and provide business value along the way really helped us feel more relaxed along the way and get value from working with an external agency. And I guess, often the agency and client relationships end up, you're kind of on speaking terms. We're kind of on conference speaking terms now, so shortcut is it worked pretty well. I'll just talk about a few of the things that were a result of this. So remember I was saying we had all of these different low-code tools that our customers, our fellows, were interacting with us via. And not all of those things are super important. You could probably get away with modeling just the main things that matter. So for us, that was Slack engagement. And that was ingesting every single Slack event, every emoji response, every, not every DM, but the fact the DM was sent. And we ingested all of that, combined it with every Zoom call, every web page view, and so on. And then you ended up with a single view of all activity across each of the different tools. And that's invaluable because suddenly you've got a place where you can say, is this fellow potentially churning? Have they not found value in the most recent sessions? And might they need someone to get in touch with them to say, it looks like you might be having some trouble here, can we help? And those things can only happen if you've got that single view. So this was really impactful just to have that data in one place. Surprisingly, finance was causing us some troubles. Like just reasoning about the different programs we're offering and the different ways that people could pay was taking a long time to close the books. And we got to the point using Tasman's work to automate the process of that end of the month reconciliation work. And it took a lot of effort out of the operational team, which is great. And that ops team actually expanded in what we could do for them. They were then able to pull data around various different ways we were measuring the success of the business and turn that into a heartbeat report. So each week at management leadership meetings, you could see the state of the business. And that improved over time. You know, you don't get those reports on day one, but steadily we're able to improve the fidelity and the kind of pace that we're getting that data through so the team can make better decisions. So I think the operational and leadership teams really benefited in the long run here. And once you've invested once, you don't need to do that again. It's just part of what the business has. And from a product point of view, once you've got a good set of data, well, you start getting some interesting effects. OnDeck's a network of people. The way that we support people in the community to get value is by connecting them with other people. And we can start now modeling the kind of nodes and edges in essentially a graph network of all the different interactions and skills and introductions and so on that are within the community. We could see if someone's spamming someone else, or maybe these people should have an intro. And that ends up with really curated impact for the end customer. So the team now are taking what we've built and are then able to bring that into the product. And I suspect there's going to be a lot of different data products that come from this. So a couple of final slides for me. I just wanted to emphasize this. No code is so powerful. Its strength lies in its flexibility. And I think we're going to see a wave of startups now using these kinds of things to get going, particularly early stage. You can just make so much progress very quickly. But the downside is its flexibility. Because it's less solid, it's more fluid, it's harder to reason about as data professionals. And so we need to adjust the way that we handle that data and the expectations we have around working with those teams. So if you're using no code, you're probably going to have a data problem. And further from that, pretty much everyone I expect will have some aspect of no code in any organization anytime soon. So it's worth thinking about how you're going to handle this and anything you might want to put in place. It's to make sure that you're set up so you don't end up with the kind of mind-exploding GIF that I showed earlier in response to this stuff. So thanks so much for listening to us. We do have some time for questions, and we also have the Slack channel, Coalesce London attendees. If you wanted to put any questions in there, we'll be in the channel responding. But thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, excellent. Perfect. I think we have some mic runners as well.
We've got some mics here. If people want to put up their hand, we'll bring them down to you.
Also good to note that at Tasman we are recruiting, so any people who want to help us with solving problems like Steph's, come and see us. We wear Tasman hoodies.
Maybe you just want an easy life.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, any questions that we can help answer? Yes, here on the second row.
How long was the project?
Right. When did we start, Steph? Summer of 2021, right?
Yeah, I think it was something like May.
Yeah.
That's when we kicked in.
Yeah.
And then that's been ongoing until now.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're approaching more like kind of support and ongoing development. But that was a good...
I think the main topology of everything that we built was there about 5-6 months after the start. It was particularly complex. I mean, 270 lines of code to generate 150K lines doesn't seem like a lot of work, but I think it was a lot of work to get there, at least a couple of months to get to the point where we're comfortable with the Airtable data ingestion. Yeah. Yep. All right. Yes, over there.
There's another mic here. Do you want to do it, Jacob?
Oh, this is a decision matrix. Good.
Hey, very interested in the lack of staging environment. Will you ever add a staging environment? Is that can you carry on not having a staging environment on deck?
So it's worth separating out the kind of software engineering aspect of what we build. So there's actual software, React, Node, GraphQL, that is the kind of product. The piece that we're talking about here is the kind of no-code environment that sits around it. So there's very much a good development culture in the pure software engineering team. In this world, we actually grew a no-code team within OnDeck who've now put in place recipes and approaches for scaling no-code. And essentially what we've learned is that early on you do prototypes and learn from the customer using no-code, and then there becomes a decision point where you decide to either throw that away or harden it. And the hardening process is when you start putting in things like, okay, we've got the staging version of this workflow, okay, now we mirror it in the production. It's just the systems aren't necessarily built to support that kind of way of working, so early on you still follow the test in production kind of approach. It still sounds quite scrappy, but it does mean you can move quickly, and that's the side of the fence that the team want to be on.
Yeah. Gotcha. Also note how Steph has not said he's sorry about using Airtable, right? As in, it's a...
It wasn't my fault.
Let's see. There's a gentleman over here. I'm sorry, I'm losing track of this side of the room. My apologies. Yeah, go on.
Hi. Is a domain model the same as a data vault? If not, how does it differ?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? There was a bit of an echo there.
Is the domain model similar to a data vault? If not, how does it differ?
So I think there's a few different ways of modeling it conceptually, I guess, right? At the end of the day, the domain model for us is a paper exercise. A data vault is more of a way to structure already existing data. I would probably kind of make the differentiation. So I think they're pretty similar in what they try to do, namely have an idea of what you're modeling in the business, and then try to find the data that kind of fills up that model, rather than first looking at the data and then trying to figure out how to model it from there. Yeah, absolutely. There's a few interesting tools and technologies out there that start to formalize this a bit more. I think Reconfigured is one that's trying to build a map of entities around what you're doing in your business. There must be others out there that are trying to solve the same problem. For us, it works really well as a Miro or Lucid chart to kind of just build up the theoretical understanding. It's really interesting for us to do it in the first sprint of any project that we run with clients, because it's a great excuse to really understand the business as deeply as possible straight away. Yeah. Great.
Yeah, hi, thanks, great talk.
Thank you.
I guess like you mentioned a lot about data modeling and also a lot about keeping stakeholders happy. One thing we struggle with in my business is like delivering quick insight to stakeholders and keeping them happy versus trying to make the sort of big step changes in our infrastructure that will allow us to continue scaling. Do you have any advice on like sort of handling and navigating that tension?
Yeah, it's the intent. I mean, I started out as a sort of, well, when analytics engineering, data engineering, it was all called data science still back in 2012, 2013, and I've been in plenty of situations where there's just a sort of local optimum of stakeholders coming by your desk every single day asking for reports, and you never really have the time to step back and rebuild your architecture from scratch. So it's difficult. You need to block out the time one way or the other. It is something that has such a high return on investment that you should be able to make the business case internally that you need that month to kind of re-architect the models. You can work with us as well. We're happy to come and assist if that makes sense. But yeah, no, it makes a tremendous amount. I mean, I cannot recommend highly enough to do that, to step back from the day-to-day for a couple of weeks, build your data models from scratch and go from there. When it comes to sort of, if your question was also about how to sort of generate very quick insight, or was it more about how to generate the time to build the bigger pieces?
Yeah, we're okay on quick insight. We just want to step away from that.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
One thing that we did with the product team at OnDeck was that they are slightly more sophisticated users. They're used to the kinds of data models that they're working with day in, day out in building the product. And so we actually came to a kind of an agreement with the product team that we would allow and support the use of staging data analysis because it was so close to what the product was doing. So that it's emitting this event, it's touching this database table, or it doesn't need the abstraction necessarily that the rest of the business might need, with the understanding that it might break, that the reports may be slightly less robust, and they should double check their workings. And that seemed to shortcut things a little bit. It was a slightly pragmatic choice.
Fast iterations kind of.
Yeah, that helps with the rapid iteration piece.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Awesome. There's more questions over here. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, thank you for the really interesting talk. Could you comment, please, on how to handle in this situation as well mobile product developments, which can be very volatile and unpredictable?
You're talking about the developers or the product?
Features, product features.
So are you talking about apps or are you talking about...
Apps.
Yeah, apps. So in terms of data collection, we find that it's actually easier to run mobile app analytics than it is to run kind of very sophisticated web analytics. But you have great toolkits for both. RudderStack, for instance, that we use for OnDeck, has a fantastic SDK for iOS and Android apps, not just sort of native apps, but also web apps on those platforms, of course. We find that it's a bit harder to do things like identity stitching on mobile devices. That's not necessarily a problem, as in that's the ecosystem, and there are very good reasons for all of that. In the case of OnDeck, I think we stayed away from sort of the app world a little bit. We just kind of did things mainly on the website. But app analytics is just another data source for us to kind of pull in data and then start modeling it. We do screen views, we do button clicks in apps, and so on and so on. Is your question about the data modeling as well, or is it more about the sort of data ingestion there?
I guess it's more about the fact that it's quite volatile. That even the data layer, right? The events can change, the feature can change, the order of screens can change in the flow, and then even if you have reporting or you create a data layer, like it can change with the next release. And
we did face some of this in that we had lots of different web properties that we were trying to track, and coming up with a harmonized way of representing the data was a challenge. So we used something called Arvo, which gave us a tracking plan that we could then give to the developers who were doing the front-end analytics tracking implementation, and they would make sure that every event matched the overall schema that was in the plan. And so that kind of normalized things after a while. It took a while to roll out, and of course then you end up with slightly broken reports historically, if you're not careful. But that harmonization meant that we've declared that these are the events we're tracking and this is the shape of them. And I think doing something like that can be really helpful for mobile. There's governance there, and actually for mobile, we're big fans of Snowplow's approach as well, where you have a very centralized event dictionary, so any event being sent from a mobile app or from a website, it needs to have an adjacent record in the event dictionary before it gets passed through the pipeline. And that creates a set of rules and dictionaries and definitions that then your developer team has to use in order to make sure that the events get ended up in the data warehouse. There's a balance there. There's also tools like Amplitude or Mixpanel, where it's a bit easier to send in sort of slightly less formatted or less structured events. We like the structured way. That's why we work with Avo, with OnDeck or Snowplow for some of our other clients. Yeah.
Okay, we actually only have time for one more question.
One more question.
These guys are around all day, though, which is great. Ready to choose someone over there?
I think we over here.
Question for Steph. Now that you know kind of the trade-offs of speed and chaos, how would you, if you could go back in time, what would you do differently?
Well, that's a good one. So I think that OnDeck did a really good job of getting going quickly, and the instinct there was to make sure that you were kind of spreading the load around. And if I were to go back and make some changes, it would probably around defining the rules of engagement around using no-code tools. So it's great to be able to get going and do early stage prototyping, but you have to have some guardrails around that. Where am I looking? Because I couldn't see where the speaker was. Over there. Thank you. So what we established later on was a kind of rule set by which we would say this is prototype worthy, and then it can end here, and now we're going to harden it. Up until then, there wasn't a sense of a playbook for using no-code tools in a kind of safe way. Now that the team have become more used to this, there's some kind of best practices that the team have put in place, which have really I think the kind of thing that many organizations will face. Like, this is how you use no code, this is what we do or do not put into the code base, and this is what we keep in the no code world. I think we would have done better to provide that playbook earlier. And I also think that if we'd done that, we would have made it more repeatable. A lot of the no-code stuff that was going on, we were literally copying and pasting workflows because there wasn't time to generalize them. Because to generalize a no-code setup, you've got to rebuild it, basically, in many ways. And so I think earlier refactoring of the no-code tooling to be more general would have had a massive impact for us. So those two things really are kind of playbook and ejecting earlier from the prototype.